Luke chapter 4, beginning at verse 14.
Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him, and he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Then he went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath he taught the people. They were amazed at his teaching, because his words had authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by a demon, an impure spirit, and he cried out at the top of his voice, "Go away! What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." Then the demon threw the man down before them all and came out without injuring him. All the people were amazed and said to each other, "What words are these? What authority and what power he gives orders to impure spirits, and they come out." And the news about him spread throughout the surrounding area. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up at once and began to wait on them. At sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Thank you, Carrie. Would you pray with me once more as we come to God's Word? Let's pray together. Father, we pause now as we come to consider your Word that you have promised us has the power to transform our hearts. We need that this morning, Lord. Some of us need to be encouraged. Some of us need rest and peace to flood into our hearts. Some of us need to be awakened and challenged. Lord, you know exactly what each and every one of us this morning needs. And so we just pray that you would come by your Spirit and use your word upon our hearts, that we would see the beauty, the glory of Jesus, and that we would enjoy him. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So we continue this morning in our sermon series looking at biblical justice. We've been looking at many different aspects of this concept that's found throughout Scripture. And so here's a little pop quiz for our young people here. So young people, kids, What is the Hebrew word for justice that we translate justice? Mishpat. Good job, Atticus. All right, here's the second pop quiz question. What is the very closely related, almost synonym word found in Scripture that is translated righteousness? I'm looking out here. Okay, yes. What is it? Tzedakah. Good job. Wow, excellent job. You guys know Hebrew now. So tzedakah and mishpat, these huge concepts that often in Scripture are brought together. And what we've been seeing over and over and over is that in the Bible, this concept of mishpat, this concept of justice, 9 times out of 10 refers to care and concern for the weak and the marginalized. I mean, it's stunning how much we find this as a priority of God in Scripture, of a description of His own heart, and also for how He calls His people to live. And as those are brought together in Scripture, we saw this as we've talked about tzedakah and righteousness, is that it is inevitably social. It's relational. It's how we treat other people. One of the best translations of those two terms coming together is social justice. Now that's a phrase that has a lot of connotation to it in our day, and it's got a lot of different things that it might bring to mind. But the reality is that's really what it's indicating in Scripture. It's this idea of taking up the cause and the needs of the vulnerable. Making it your passion, as we saw with Job last week, your passion to get involved with the needs in their life and to see them flourish, to see, as Job said about his own heart, to cause the widow's heart to sing. It's not just about handouts and meeting of needs, but it's a total commitment to the flourishing of a person who is excluded and who is suffering. So we've seen this concept. We're looking at it throughout Scripture. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but every instance of this that we've looked at so far in this series has been in the Old Testament. Now, we've talked about how in the Old Testament, mishpat is found over 200 times, just that word alone. It's a huge concept, but we've been looking primarily at the Old Testament, and so you might be wondering to yourself, okay, that's great. I see that that's huge in the Old Testament, but is it really all that important in the New? Is it really a passion and a concern of Jesus and His teaching the way it was in the Old Testament? I mean, isn't it a shift where maybe God was interested in that in the Old Testament, but now whenever we get to the New, we're just about preaching the gospel. We don't need to get all involved in the needs of people and doing all these things socially to lift people up and care for the needs. Surely that's a distraction. Surely now we just need to preach the gospel, and that's it. And that is a very, very common understanding in the evangelical church in America. So we're going to turn in this series, and for this week and next week, we're going to talk about, well, what does Jesus say about justice? Is it a concern for Him? Is it something that He was passionate about that marked His ministry? And that's what we'll begin to see in our passage today. So here we are. We're jumping into Luke chapter 4. Now this scene, this story, brings us to the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. And what I want you to do, and this is a great way to read narratives in Scripture, to imagine yourself there. I love the way in which Luke brings us into the drama of this story. So he tells us right off the bat, we're in Nazareth. We're in Jesus' hometown. He's in the synagogue, and in the synagogue, undoubtedly it would have been filled with people. It probably wasn't as crowded as this room is here. He probably knew everyone in there, and they knew him. In fact, one of them says, hey, isn't this Joseph's boy? We know him. He's pretty good at this speaking thing. He knew everyone in there. They had seen him grow up. They probably had worshiped together in the same congregation. But in this moment, everything was different. This comes on the heels of Jesus going into the wilderness and being anointed with the Holy Spirit. That was the empowerment that Jesus moves out into His ministry from. And this is one of the first things that we're told. So we're brought into the synagogue here. Jesus is in there, and as was the custom, there would have been a reading during the synagogue, and anyone in the congregation could read at different times and make comments on a passage. And so Jesus steps up and he takes the scroll of Isaiah and he unrolls it to this particular passage in Isaiah 61. Now this was a very famous passage. This was a messianic passage. In other words, this was a passage that was pointing ahead to the coming of the Messiah. And not only that, it was describing what the Messiah would do. Now this was at the very heart of their faith, that one day God was going to enter into human history as never before, that he would usher in his kingdom through a son of David. That's what the Messiah means. He would be a king who would come in the line of David and bring all of these promises, all the promises of the prophets, the promises that God had made to Abraham and Isaac and Moses and David. This Messiah would bring them all to fruition. And this was a picture about what his kingdom would bring. So Jesus unrolls to this moment. He reads the passage. He sits down. He hands it back. Luke slows down the action, so that we're drawn into it. He hands the scroll back to the attendant. He sits down, and we're told all the eyes were fastened upon him. There was something about this moment. If you've ever been in a place and you just get a sense of the weight of a moment, this is what they would have felt. Something just happened in this room, and all the eyes were fixed upon Jesus. Maybe it was he read with an authority that they had never heard, and he sits down, and this is what he says: "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Can you imagine being a part of that moment? This is a promise that they were longing for thousands of years. Longing and reading, they would have memorized this and just imagine what it would be like, but maybe the idea that they would ever see this fulfilled is just totally far-fetched. And yet in this moment, Jesus says, now this is fulfilled. A moment loaded with significance. It's like, a sermon where he just drops the mic in that moment. I'm here. It's begun. Now, one of the interesting things that we see as we look at this description here, so why would Jesus read this passage? In reading this passage, Jesus is saying, this is my mission. This is what I'm about. I have been anointed for this. Now, what's amazing is, now why would Jesus describe this to describe his ministry? What do we notice as we look at this passage that he chooses? What does it tell us about what Jesus describes as the very heart of his mission? And here's what we see as we look at it. It's all about mishpat. Isn't that fascinating? His description here of his mission is all about justice. Bringing justice, lifting up the disadvantaged. I mean, look again at what he says. It's concerned with the poor. I've been anointed to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Everyone who is in captivity to anything, whether it be spiritual, whether it be physical, whether it be structures in society, I've come to proclaim freedom from that. That's what my arrival means. The setting free of people. Recovery of sight for the blind, all those who have been maimed, all those who are sick, all those who are handicapped. My coming means a release and a healing from that. It has a physical meaning, but of course also a spiritual meaning, as we see throughout the Gospels, as Jesus would come to open people's eyes to the truth and who God really is and who he is. And then finally, to release the oppressed, that his ministry would be all about setting people free. The people in society and life who are held down, who are taken advantage of, who are excluded, would be released and set free. And Jesus says, this is what I'm about. It's mishpat. And this is Jesus saying, this is my mission. This is what I'm about. Now, one interesting thing here is that he says, I've come to preach good news to the poor. So another pop quiz for us kids. What does good news mean? What is the word for good news found throughout the Bible? H. Gospel. Very good. Excellent job. Jesus literally said, I've been anointed to preach the gospel to the poor. Now, whenever we hear gospel, we have all kinds of connotations. You know, we're in the Bible Belt here, and we're very familiar with that term probably. But usually what we think of whenever we think of gospel is pray a prayer and you'll go to heaven when you die. Jesus came to die for our sins that we can go to heaven when we die. Now, let me say right off the bat, that is certainly a part of the gospel. But it is too narrow to understand the fullness of what Jesus taught about the gospel. Jesus preached the gospel of the kingdom. Jesus preached that with his arrival, God's long-awaited kingdom was coming into the world finally at last. And what that kingdom meant is literally justice and peace filling the entire earth. You know, that was the hope and the expectation of all the Old Testament, that one day God would intervene as never before, and he would set his people free. He would lift them up. He would remove all oppression. He would take everything that is wrong in the world and make it right. He would crush all of his enemies. He would bring about the renewal of all things, even the renewal of the earth. The coming of the kingdom was the promise of nothing less than a new heavens and a new earth. And so all of that was contained in the gospel of the kingdom. Jesus said, I've come to make all things new, to transform all things, our hearts, our bodies, our entire world. That is the gospel of the kingdom. Now, what's interesting here is that he says it is good news, particularly for the poor. Now, why would it say that? Jesus says that many times in his ministry, that the gospel of the kingdom is good news for the poor. Now, poor in Luke and throughout the Bible just doesn't mean only economically, materially poor. It is a broad category that categorizes all people who are excluded, who are taken advantage of, who are on the outside, the foreigner, the people who've made a mess of their life, the people who are helpless and dependent and needy, the people who are on the bottom and on the margins of society. That was all contained in the poor, in this concept of the poor. And Jesus says the gospel is good news. My arrival is good news. The kingdom is good news, particularly for those people. Now, why would that be the case? Because if in this life you are losing, if in this life you are suffering, if in this life you are without, then the promised future kingdom is an amazing promise for you. That like this life is hard. I'm like, I don't matter in this world. I'm on the outside. I'm on the bottom. I'm on the fringes. I'm in a minority. But the kingdom is coming. And God's going to bring about the reversal of all things. And we're going to inherit the earth. See, the reality is that the more broken you are, the more in need you are, the greater the news of God's coming kingdom. You see, if you're on top in this world and you got it all and you're winning, well, you're not so excited about the kingdom. But if the opposite is true of you, it is truly good news. So that's Jesus' description of what he has come to bring. And in that moment, we're told in verse 22, all spoke well of him. You know, as he announces this, he announces this coming of the kingdom. They hear Jesus and they're like, wow, Joseph's boy can talk. I like it. We're all for this. But something changes in this sermon. Did you notice this? It's very interesting, easy to miss here. But Jesus, at that point in the sermon, was killing it. I mean, he had them just right there. They're loving it. Yes, they're with him. They're shouting, dancing. But did you see how this sermon ends up? You know, I've blown a couple sermons before. I've preached some rough sermons, but I've never messed one up this bad. I've never had the whole congregation erupt into a riot. I've never had the congregation, hopefully it won't be today, I've never had you rush me, grab me, drag me out, up on the sand mountain, up on the side of a cliff, and try to throw me off. I've never had that happen. I hope I don't. The question is, what happened? What went wrong, Jesus? You were nailing it. And consider who these people are. These are religious people. I mean, these are the cream of the crop. I mean, they're in church on Sunday, for crying out loud. They're not sleeping in. They're not honky-tonking. They're there. They've devoted their life to memorizing God's Word. They're meticulously giving themselves to obeying God's law. I mean, these are the ultra-conservatives. You want to talk about ultra-conservatives? Here, they're ultra-conservatives, okay? They're all in. They're incredibly religious. But yet, in a moment's notice, there's a turn, and they're trying to kill Jesus. Now, that might be hard for us to imagine, but some of us might have been really hurt and wounded by religious people. And listen, Jesus, in his ministry, was often calling out religious, self-righteous people. It was a hallmark of his ministry. So what happens here? What turns it? What causes this thing to right there? Here's what happens. Jesus puts his finger on their self-righteousness. He had a way of doing this. You see, Jesus knew that what's more dangerous than sometimes the immoral kind of sins that we can run after in our life, what is more dangerous than throwing off God and running after the things of this world, and it's almost even hard to imagine, what's even more dangerous than that is self-righteousness in our hearts. Nothing will blind us and separate us from God more than our self-righteousness. And Jesus puts his finger right on it. He puts his finger on their prejudice, which all of our prejudice is just an aspect of our self-righteousness. This deep-seated belief that I'm right because of something about me, that I'm more acceptable to God, that I'm better than others, that I'm more holy, that I'm more pleasing to God because of these things in my life, because I've got my life together, I vote the right way, I understand how things ought to be, I don't do this, this, and this, and I do all of these good things, and therefore God owes me. He is obligated to bless me, and that's what they're saying. You see, Jesus begins to just go right at the heart of the matter, and he says, I know what you're saying. Physician, heal yourself, which was a common kind of little phrase in their day. And what it meant was, Jesus, you've been going around and we've heard you went to Capernaum and you healed all these people, you brought all these blessings. Now it's our turn. Do it for us. And Jesus knew they had no idea why he came. They had no idea what he came to bring and to offer. In fact, they didn't want it. And then he tells two stories about how in the days of Elijah and Elisha, two of the most prominent prophets in the Old Testament, God sends his blessing not to Israel and his own people, but to the outsiders, to the undeserving. He tells one story about Elijah in a day of famine is sent particularly to a widow in Sidon. That was outside of Israel. This woman had a lot of strikes against her. She was a woman, which meant in this day you had very little social status. She was a widow. That means she had no social power. And she was a Gentile, the ultimate outsider. And yet he points out how God's heart sent Elijah to go and to feed and bless her. And then he talks about Elisha with Naaman the Syrian. If you're familiar with that story, Naaman was a Syrian general, a commander of their army. The Syrians were Israel's enemies, the ultimate outsiders, a wicked Gentile. This would have been someone that Jews hated. They looked down on the nations around them. And yet, Elisha brings healing and cleansing of leprosy to Naaman. Jesus points out those, and in doing so, Jesus is saying, you think it's all about you. You think that the way that it works with God is because of your righteousness, because of your goodness, because of your obedience. It's not worship to God. It's not for God. It's ultimately for you. It's a way to put God in your debt. You're self-righteous. And because of your self-righteous, you're racist. You're prejudiced. And the fact that his compassion and grace would be poured out upon undeserving outsiders, it was offensive to them. And their reaction is one of anger. See, here's the reality. Whenever your heart is self-righteous, whenever you are basing your acceptance before God upon what you do, mercy is distasteful to you. You know, the idea of God blessing those who don't deserve it, it just doesn't sit right with you. And for them, it made them angry because they had been working hard. They had been doing all the right things, and God owed them. And you see, that's why they could not understand the gospel of the kingdom. You see, whenever they hear the gospel, they say, oh, it's all for me because I deserve it. And Jesus says, no, you don't understand it. It's all of grace. There is no deserving. You can't deserve it. Nobody deserves it. It's always to the undeserving. It's always to the sinner. And that's why God has this special concern for the people who are on the outside, who are losing in life. It's God's heart to show his favor to those who do not have it. His heart is overflowing with mercy and grace. And his people cannot get it because they cannot get grace. Here's a question for us. Do you love grace? Do you love it? Does it just thrill your heart? Does it just astound you? Does it bring you joy and excitement? The idea that God looks upon someone like me with delight and pleasure. Does it just capture your imagination and say, this just doesn't make sense? You know, if you know your heart, and yet in spite of all that's true of us, to believe that in Jesus, God has accepted us as righteous, that Jesus came and took all of my punishment upon himself, all of my sin, and has given me his righteousness, his perfect record, so that the Father looks upon me in spite of my sin with pleasure and acceptance and delight. Does that just blow you away? Because if it doesn't, it means I'm not fully receiving it. And it's hard to receive grace. Because to receive it, what has to happen? We have to acknowledge our need. And we don't like to feel needy, do we? We like to move away from need. That's why we avoid needy people. We don't like to feel need. We don't like to be in need. We like independence. We like strength. We don't like weakness. We don't like vulnerability. It's just native to our heart. And we just imagine this is what God wants too. He wants me to be strong. He wants me to have the record put together. That's why whenever we blow it, we avoid God rather than run into him. Because we think ultimately what God wants is our strength and our put-togetherness. You see, but when we see our need, it puts us in a place where we're able to receive grace. Are you experiencing that? Because let me tell you who the gospel is good news for. I mean, good news that just makes you want to dance, that makes you want to share it with other people. You know, sometimes we wonder, why don't we share the gospel that much? I think it's because we don't really believe it's the best news in the world. When I get good news, I'm telling people about it. It's like an immediate urge. You know, last night, Georgia just had this glorious victory over Tennessee. I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? And listen, you know what I did with that? I'm telling people about it. I'm sharing the good news. I'm dancing. I'm throwing my kids in the air. We're celebrating and feasting. Why? Not because anybody said, now, Georgia beat a rival, so you should be happy now, and maybe you should tell some people about it. It was just automatic. Why? Because it's amazing news. Right? Let me tell you something. Grace is not going to be amazing unless you are broken. When you get broken, you are in a place to be amazed at grace. That's just how it works. If you get broken over your sin, The habits and patterns in your life. I mean, we all have that, right? We all have those patterns of sin in our life where we keep asking, why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep going back there whenever I'm determined not to do it and I do it again? And what ends up happening is we end up saying, I'm just going to cordon off this area of my life. I can't keep coming back to God over this. We just kind of live in denial of those areas when in fact, that is the very doorway to the gospel. Those are the very areas that are likely to introduce us to ourselves and the true reality of our brokenness and need of grace. Our sin and our brokenness is the way to Jesus. And let me tell you something. Once grace begins to impact and ignite your heart, you know what's going to happen? You are going to begin to be merciful towards other people. You are going to do justice. That's the point I'm trying to make throughout this whole series. What makes us a people passionate about the vulnerable, passionate about the weak and the disenfranchised and the minority and all of these people? What's going to make us a people whose hearts are broken over racism? How people are treated differently because of their culture or the color of their skin. What's going to make us a people whose hearts break over that? Grace. When grace is electrifying your heart, it makes us a people passionate about justice. Because when we see another person excluded, oppressed, without, in need, we're looking in the mirror. We're looking at ourselves. And we say, you know what? I was poor before God. I was spiritually poor, spiritually bankrupt. I had nothing to offer him. I was excluded. I was an orphan. I had nothing to offer God, nothing at all. And yet he chose me. He came for me apart from anything that I've ever done. You see how that creates a heart moved towards people like that. So let me stop there and just give us a few moments to discuss. How does that strike you? How does that move you? How does that challenge you? Let's discuss it for a few minutes. Michael will get the mic going here. Is it hard for you to really understand grace? Does it make sense how grace makes us just? Let's discuss. And somebody's got to go first, or else we'll have 20 minutes of silence here. Thank you, Lydia.
I just am remembering this week, I saw my brother's girlfriend posted something on social media that was pretty harsh towards Christians, and I mean, she's not a believer, and it was like, you know, Christians say they're oppressed, but they go and proselytize here and go overseas, and just was listing all these things. I just was feeling really sad that that's what she thinks about me and all, you know, many people, but then also wondering, like, what would it have been like if she had seen someone who was living like this, who had, if she had experienced grace and love, if she had met someone who had truly been transformed by grace. And yet apparently her experience and the friend who originally posted it, that's not been their experience with Christians. At least based on this post, they have a very negative view. So anyway, just it kind of challenged me as far as how do I relate with her, and also just. Yeah, this picture, this is like a really great picture. I would love for her to see that picture. Not what she had posted. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Lydia. Lydia's just pointing out this reality that's very, very common among unbelievers in America. That as they look at the churches, they look at believers, they don't see this in us. They don't see us as being a people passionate about justice and mercy and the weak and the sick and the poor and the needy. They don't see that characterized in us. And I think there's a couple reasons. I think one of the reasons is because in the evangelical church in America, we've separated word and deed. And so we've said, okay, if you're going to be passionate about sharing the gospel, and you said that she was like she was sharing her brother's girlfriend. She's not a believer, and she was accusing Christians of, you're all the time proselytizing people, and you don't care about matters of justice. And there's been this separation to say, if we really need to just focus on sharing the gospel, not doing actual works of mercy and justice in the world. And a part of that comes from a form of theology in the church in years past and in certain parts of the church that actually removed the word and said we shouldn't proselytize people, we shouldn't share the gospel, we should just do mercy. And so in reaction, the evangelical church says, no, we've got to focus on sharing the gospel. None of the other matters. And what we've got to see that with Jesus, he did not pit them against each other. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Jesus, we're told, was powerful in word and deed. He healed people. He touched people. He touched lepers, people that hadn't been touched for 20 years. He touched them. I mean, that's worth just pondering. He touched people. He healed people. His heart was for them, and he preached the gospel to them. He put them together. And it is our tangible love and works of justice and mercy that give power and credence to our words. It's like the gospel demonstrated. Now, we shouldn't ever pit them against each other. They should be together. Now, I'll just encourage you to say, in the past, the church has done this, particularly in seasons of great revival. The early church, I mean, all historians, as they look back on the explosive growth of the early church, you know what they point to? They point to their sacrificial deeds of justice and mercy, even at the risk of their own life. I mean, during the plagues and pandemics, we have a great opportunity right now. But in that time, it was the Christians that were moving towards the poor and the sick and the needy when Roman culture was going the other way. And it gave power to their words. So we've got to not pit them against each other. They're essential. Our works of justice give power and credence and credibility to the words of the gospel. We shouldn't ever exclude either of those. They go together. No, you can just talk into it.
Well, I was just thinking that I was about to add on to, I'm sorry, I didn't see who was talking before me, but somebody back there, she was talking. This happened to my grandparents a little while ago. So they were over with their friends, and not my grandparents, their friend, said, I hate Christians. And then my grandpa said, so you hate Wileen? And she just kind of, but back to grace, I was thinking it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. It's a hard concept to wrap our head around because as humans, it's instinct to build yourself up without any care for anybody else.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's what we are built to do.
Yes.
And I think it would be very hard, like, as in it's never going to happen, probably. Never say never, but for everybody to have grace for one another.
Yes. You are exactly right. One day it will be so. That's the good news of the kingdom. But you are so right, Atticus. That's really in all of our hearts. To build ourselves up and tear other people down. It's just what we do. And it's our self-righteousness. Our hearts are inclined towards it. And we're like allergic to grace. But when grace begins to penetrate, it begins to uproot that natural tendency in our hearts. Thank you, Atticus. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? Sarah?
I think for me, I have a really hard time accepting grace and extending it towards myself. I think I do okay towards other people, but I know my own heart, and so I'm like, this is too much. I'm too bad. And as you were talking, I was like, I see the depths of my brokenness. I know it's deep and dark and ugly. But I think where my self-righteousness kind of flares up is that it's not an issue that I don't see that brokenness, but the issue is that I think I can fix it myself. And I think I often trick myself into thinking I'm trusting God, but really I'm like, well, if I pray this many times and if I read my Bible this many times, then I will have been good enough to receive grace. And so it's so messed up. Yes. Because it's still not truly trusting the Lord. And I'm thankful that he's showing me that, and that he's not like, well, this is a lesson that I've been trying to teach you for so long, I'm tired. But he continues to be like, you know what, I think you're worth it, so I'm going to keep coming after you, which is when I'm like, oh, and I start to really understand who he is and what he's done.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. I totally identify. It's amazing the ways that our hearts are so sneaky in finding ways to think, I got to earn this. We come up with little formulas. If I do this, then God will accept me and love me. And there's a part of us that we want to be loved because we deserve it. And it's hard to just drop all of our pretense and receive love like a child. Well, I want to give us a homework assignment, if that's okay. Your homework assignment is to this week. I'd love for you to try this every day, but I want you to, you're going to have to get away from your phone and find some time to be alone and quiet. It's going to be incredibly hard to do, but this is a homework assignment. Get some time where you are alone, just you and God, and I want you to meditate on the grace of the gospel. I want you to meditate on God's love and acceptance of you in Christ. And just sit there and just say, what if it really is true? Because maybe for many of us, that's where we got to start. What if it were true? What if God saw everything about me, even more than I even see about myself? What if he saw all of my brokenness, all of my sin, all that is just broken in me, and yet he loves and is delighted with me right now, apart from anything I do, right now, because of Jesus? What would that be like? Just meditate on it. And then turn your homework in to me. I'd love to hear about what happens to you when you do that. Okay, that's your homework assignment. I'm checking homework. Okay, let's pray. Father, if we're honest, we are probably a lot like that synagogue congregation in Jesus' day. Maybe it's that we're not as invested and passionate as they are, so we're not going to become enraged over grace. But Lord, I wonder if our hearts are shaped in a similar way, where we cannot imagine your heart of grace, that you call wicked people righteous in Christ, that you would die for your enemies. I think we don't get it because we hate our enemies quite a bit, Lord. If we were to really get that, I wonder how we would begin to feel about our own enemies, that we might actually begin to love them, even if they're in the other political party, even if they're our neighbor or even a family member. Lord, we long to be a people of mercy and justice. Would you cause your grace to penetrate our hearts, fill us with joy, and make us a people of justice, a reflection of your very own heart in the world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.